Sinkholes. Sudden.
Oh, it was a total disaster zone. It looked like a bomb went off.
Terrifying.
This building's coming down.
Deadly.
We lost everything.
When the earth opens, it can swallow cars, homes, even people.
All of a sudden, everything just went out like that.
Yet history reveals a side to the abyss we can't live without.
There is nothing to compare to the beauty of the cenotes in the Yucatan.
And as science unlocks a geological imperative, are humans to blame for a growing disaster? Hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes.
This was the deadliest tornado on record.
The impact can be devastating.
God completely wiped it off the map.
We step inside the disaster.
We were running for our lives.
It hits like a freight train.
And unravel the unexpected and sometimes jaw-dropping total impact.
Believe it or not, some good can come from these monster storms.
Below the Earth's surface, something sinister stirs. A monster lies in wait. A gaping hole growing under a hotel. But as guests come and go, no one is aware that it's about to rear its destructive, deadly head. Sisters Faith and Deborah, along with Faith's two sons, Grant and Liam, arrive in Florida for vacation. But things are a little off when they return to their favorite hotel.
The elevator was not working. And it was like there was a day it would work and then a couple of days where it wouldn't. And there was some cracking in the columns. It was a little inconvenient.
The sisters are unaware that these small inconveniences are actually clues. Warning signs to an impending disaster. For the family, the trip is a treat before the boys head back to school in the fall.
We had been to Florida several times and at this resort, so we knew the resort and we were there having a great time.
With more than a dozen theme parks, Orlando, Florida is one of the top tourist destinations in the world. Their resort is nearby in Claremont. With free shuttle service to the surrounding theme parks, it's the perfect place to relax and have fun. After 3 days at the parks, they decide to spend a day back at the resort. Put their feet up and unwind. But their relaxing is about to take a shocking turn.
I was taking a bath and the tub moved and the water splashed and Faith's yelling at me to get out of the tub. That's when I realized something was terribly wrong.
I heard a boom. It sounded like a twisting sound. So I immediately ran over and called the front and said, "Did we just have an earthquake?" And the person laughed at me and said, "We don't have those here. You can go back to bed."
While Floridians are familiar with tropical storms and hurricanes, the state lies nowhere near a tectonic plate. In fact, Florida is tied with North Dakota for having the fewest earthquakes in the nation. But Faith is certain something is wrong.
I ran to the front door and opened the front door, and I could see that our walkway was splitting from the rest of the building. I called back down and I said, "You may have told me to go back to bed, but this building's coming down."
Faith and Deborah have no idea they've checked into a hotel atop a terrifying geological phenomenon that's causing devastation around the planet. A giant sinkhole.
The Florida geology is made up of limestone, primarily carbonate rock, which has a lot of perforations. It's almost like Rice Krispie. And so water flows freely through that, which makes it a very good aquifer. While the aquifer itself is a good source of drinking water, that whole geology causes some instability in the ground. When the water gets pushed through the rocks into this aquifer, it takes material with it, causing cavities to form on top. And those cavities grow eventually to become sinkholes.
The hotel creaks and groans as a dark void grows below, increasing in size until it's ready to swallow the hotel and everyone inside.
The feeling and the noise was definitely something that was not natural. The kids were starting to panic.
It was very scary. We saw that the walkway was coming away from the side of our building. I was lucky enough to grab keys in my wallet, and we were out. As we were going down the stairs, we're hollering, "You need to get out, you need to get out, the building's coming down." I mean, we were running for our lives, literally.
Once the family escapes the building, Faith runs for help.
I had started my shift at 11 o'clock, and I was on a golf cart doing my checks. And as I passed this building, a woman come running out of the building and told me that they had a problem in the building.
I ran for the security guard that was coming by on the golf cart. And I said, you need to come with me. This building's coming down. He kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I literally pulled him off the golf cart and made him stand and listen and hear everything.
I could hear popping and cracking of the building. It sounded like gunshots. All I see is the building collapsing.
Despite the danger, Richard races inside to alert the guests.
I had started knocking on doors and trying to get people up and wake them up to get them out of the buildings. One room that I went to, there was a lady in there that had a baby in a crib. And I banged on the door. I told her, "Ma'am, you got to get out." No sooner did she pick that child up out of the crib, the back wall collapsed of her room. She just started screaming. I said, "Ma'am, please calm down. It'll be okay. But we need to get you out of here." The building, it was twisting almost like a licorice stick.
It sounded like almost a bomb went off because everything was exploding.
It was tilting, and then finally just broke off. It was collapsing. It was just amazing. It was like someone had just broken off a part of it and thrown it off to the side. I'm amazed that everyone made it out.
I think we were all in shock. And I remember going over and sitting on the curb with my hands on my head, and I'm sitting there wondering, what the heck just happened?
Within 45 minutes of the first cracking sounds, much of the 3-story building has collapsed into an 18-meter wide and almost 5-meter deep sinkhole. The extreme speed of the collapse points to a particularly dangerous type of sinkhole.
A cover collapse sinkhole is where the soil above the limestone forms an arch and prevents the visible signs on the surface. As the cavity grows, the arch collapses suddenly. The cover collapse sinkhole is the most dangerous type of sinkhole because it opens up dramatically and does not give much of a warning.
I was thanking God we were out. When we looked up, you could look right into our unit and see the room my sons were staying in.
The only thing that was left of that building was a stairwell and the rooms on the very outside edge of that building.
More than 100 guests escaped to safety, including Deborah, Faith, and the boys. But how did the structure manage to stay standing so long with the cavernous hole lurking beneath it?
Because of the way the structure was built, possible that the concrete slabs and so on gave you some time by bridging the sinkhole that was already there so that you had some time before the entire system started to collapse.
We lost everything.
We left with the most important things we came with.
Yes, our lives. You never think it's going to happen to you.
They say lightning doesn't strike twice, but still, I look around at everything when I go somewhere.
Faith has good reason to be concerned. Below Florida's idyllic landscape is a ticking time bomb. It's being called Sinkhole Alley.
Normally, you don't see the front sides of houses just all of a sudden, split up and go into the ground.
Faith and Deborah may have cheated death when their hotel crashed into a sinkhole. But their experience isn't entirely uncommon. Sinkholes are a terrifying worldwide phenomenon. And in Florida, they're happening with frightening regularity.
Just like any other day, it's about 7 o'clock. I'm starting to move out, and I go to put the keys in the truck, and something just doesn't look normal. So I glance to my left at the house across the street, and then immediately something's wrong.
That morning I woke up like any other morning, and I got an alert on my agency phone that said a crew was going out to the sinkhole, so that's not an uncommon alert to get. I went about my morning, and my phone kept alerting. After about the 5th alert, I saw the list of units that were going to a sinkhole call, which is usually just a 1-unit response. There was about 3 or 4 different engines going to this sinkhole alert.
As Sean heads out, Terrence has a front row seat to a shocking scene.
I'm looking at the house and I'm hearing noises, and the front left side of the house is no longer there. I kind of had an idea of what it might be, that this is most likely a sinkhole. We're in the wet season in July. We have a lot of rain, but normally, you don't see the front sides of houses just all of a sudden split up and go into the ground.
Heavy rains and hurricane season in Florida begin around June 1st, and their landfall is often tied with the sudden appearance of sinkholes.
Sinkholes happen more when you get more rainfall and you get more pressure of water from the surface, or if you have drought or very little rain, or if you pump the water away from that area where there's water. Those can open up cavities as well.
I think that's an interesting thing.
This one piece will make 52 layers.
Watch on mobile devices or the big screen. All for free. No subscription required.
I ran back inside and asked my wife, I said, hey, you need to get out here. I said, I think Steve and Bonnie's house is going down. 911's been called, so you're starting to hear the fire trucks arrive.
When we got there, it was actively growing, and it was very loud. The earth falling into that hole and making loud splashes, the water bubbling up from the earth, making a lot of noise, almost like the water was boiling.
A wake would flow to the left, and then it would flow to the right, and it would take, every time it kind of moved back, it would take a little bit more of the land.
The interaction of water all around it was extremely dramatic, which means that it was moving, fluctuating, and had a lot of seasonal variations, which caused underground cavities to open up quite quickly.
The home starts dropping more and more and more. You start seeing it to approach the front door, and that goes down. At the same time, it's moving to the house at the left.
It was very shocking. Once we realized that hole was growing, we started to clear the roads. I've never been on an active sinkhole where it was still actively growing.
The fire department was familiar with sinkholes, but they'd never seen one swallow a house. And just 80 kilometers to the west, a hotel had collapsed into a sinkhole only a couple of years earlier. What on earth was happening? It turns out, Florida is ground zero for sinkholes in the US, and the region even has a name, Sinkhole Alley.
Sinkhole Alley is a known cluster of sinkholes that is in the central Florida area. Land O'Lakes is an area where there is a lake and connects to other cave structures underground. And then we had developed some housing on top of that. That area underground has a large number of cavities already documented. And they were extremely worried that those would all grow to either connect with each other or to reach the lake and the entire area, which would completely disappear.
The area becomes too dangerous and residents are evacuated.
Then the sheriff and the emergency responders give us about 5 to 7 minutes to gather what we can and evacuate our home. And as we're doing this, the sinkhole's still moving and expanding. At that moment, you're in disbelief. The house that we just fixed up, that we love, our little dream home on the lake, doesn't look like it's going to be there in a few hours. I was extremely worried. The creaking, the splashing, and all that stuff is now elevated to full-blown, almost demolition of a house. You could almost picture equipment in there knocking things down.
As the house was sinking into the sinkhole, large parts of it were concrete, but the wood structure of the roof and a lot of their personal belongings were actually just floating on top of the water. Sofas and papers and bills, and there was a boat in the yard on a trailer. That whole thing sunk. We couldn't go in there and get any of that stuff because the hole was too turbulent and that hole was still growing. Watching their entire life just go into a hole in the earth, there's nothing you can do. We felt helpless.
Within a few hours, they had moved us from that spot to where we couldn't see it. That was tough. It's like, I can't believe this is happening to me and to us and right here in little old Land O'Lakes, Florida.
Our fire chief was able to come out with his drone to help us determine what was going on, where this hole might be heading.
Unsatiated, the monster sinkhole goes on to consume a neighboring house and part of Terrence's property.
About 7 to 8 hours, it continuously grew. The final girth of the hole was, I believe, 260 feet across. It was deep enough to take 2 houses into it.
The next morning when you wake up, you say, was it all a dream? And you're like, okay, it wasn't a dream, because you look out and you see this disaster zone that's sitting right there. It looked like a bomb went off. Good thing that came out of the situation was no one died, no animals died.
If somebody would have been in one of those houses in Land O'Lakes when that sinkhole opened, that would have been a deadly sinkhole. I think we got very lucky that no one was home. When you see it in the news, you think, man, is that going to happen to me? It's a very scary thought.
Even scarier is when it does happen to you at night while you're in bed, sleeping.
The entire room was nothing but just an open, churning dirt pit.
When a massive sinkhole swallowed up homes in Terrence's neighborhood, it impacted their lives in unimaginable ways. But they were lucky. Not everyone is so fortunate.
Yeah, it really wasn't any different than any other day. I began at 7, answered calls throughout that evening, and I just finished that, and then that's when I got the 911 call. The call said that somebody had fallen through the floor of the house. The only thing that came into my mind was maybe somebody had fallen through maybe a rotten portion of the floor, or that maybe somebody had been doing, like a renovation. When I got onto Faithway Drive, it's a residential community. Just everybody was out in the road, like waving, flagging me down. They were hysterical. Going through the yard, the structure of the house, everything was perfectly normal. The lights were still on, the TV in the living room was still on, everything was normal. So when I get past the living room, started walking down the hallway, and you could hear almost like a grumbling noise. I don't really know how to explain it other than that. As I turned to go into that room, the entire room was nothing but just an open, churning, like dirt pit almost. The floor had completely just been ripped apart.
A sinkhole had opened up directly under the bedroom.
It is not unusual if portions of the house collapse. Sinkholes can be fairly local, and the slab itself may be giving some stability to the house. In this case, parts of the house collapse first, and then other parts sort of rotate and fall in. And so it's possible that the sinkhole in this case was either at an edge or closer to just that one room.
I remember seeing all this furniture just all over the place, but it was churning. Then I saw Jeremy. He was standing in the edge of the hole. The best way that I can explain what it looked like is if you think of like a funnel or an hourglass. The center is more or less the deepest part of that, and everything around it is caving in to that center. Jeremy at that moment was more or less climbing, if you will, trying to stay on top of the dirt that was falling in. I was thinking, I wonder if this is what a sinkhole is, because I had never experienced it. I said, hey man, we need to get you out of this.
Deputy Duvall was standing at the edge of a gaping and growing sinkhole, one that was ready to claim Jeremy Bush.
The sinkhole in Seffner was probably the most catastrophic type, where there were no signs at all that there was a collapse imminent. It happened very, very quickly. It is probably the most extreme example of a cover collapse sinkhole.
With Jeremy desperately trying to escape the clutches of the churning pit of debris, Deputy Duvall has no time to spare.
He looked up and he saw me. He reached up, and I laid down on the ground. The floor was almost like a diving board, how flimsy it was, because everything had been ripped away from that bedroom portion. I didn't realize the danger of the situation until I was down on my stomach with that diving board feeling, thinking I could end up in this hole really easy. I reached down, I somehow got his hands and just pulled. And next thing I know, Jeremy's out.
Though Jeremy is safe, the full horror of the situation becomes clear.
He said that his brother was still in there. There was nothing other than furniture that I saw. And he had this rumbling noise going on. And as soon as I had actually gotten myself in the motion of getting up and I was looking for his brother, all of a sudden everything just went out, like under the house. Everything that was there had started to fall into the hole.
Jeremy quickly recounts what happened to his 37-year-old brother, Jeffrey.
He said that his brother had gone to bed, everybody's sitting around watching TV, and when it all happened, he said it was a very loud, like, bang, and then that grumbling noise, and he heard his brother yell for him to help. He walked into a big hole in the room. He heard his brother yelling, help, so he just jumped in the hole thinking that he would be able to find him. It was just like that.
Within minutes of Deputy Duvall pulling Jeremy out of the sinkhole, emergency services arrive on the scene.
They put these listening devices in. It was gone. Just basically took it from them. So they made the decision that, that same thing could happen to a human, and you couldn't rightfully lower another human in there.
Authorities decide it's too dangerous to attempt to rescue Jeffrey Bush. The family is heartbroken.
They made the choice to take the house down, then they filled the sinkhole up about a week later. The other houses next to it, they had to vacate those houses, and they tore those down as well because of how large the hole was. The county had put up a fence around it just to keep people out of the area. And then they put some shrubs and plants around it just to make it look a little bit nicer. They actually have like a plaque there also. It's like an in memory type thing.
The tragedy will stay with Deputy Duvall and the residents of Seffner for the rest of their lives, as the fear of another possible sinkhole lurks around every corner.
You don't have a warning system for a hole just dropping out and underneath you. I don't think people really understood that until this sinkhole happened, how real of a possibility it is.
Sinkholes are a terrifying global phenomenon, swallowing 30-meter trees in Louisiana, devouring a 3-story factory in Guatemala, and collapsing a 100-meter wide hole in a street in Indonesia. And yet, there's more than meets the eye, as scientists uncover the total impact of sinkholes, their life-giving properties, and their deadly mysteries.
The Mayans were inspired by the beauty. That's one of the reasons why they revered.
Sudden, catastrophic, horrifying. Sinkholes are a deadly part of the Earth's geological makeup. Yet when an asteroid hurtled into the planet 66 million years ago, ending the age of dinosaurs, the impact produced one of the most breathtaking examples of sinkholes in the world. Today, the remnants of the crater form what's known as the Ring of Cenotes.
The ring has 180 kilometers diameter, so it's just a semicircular part that is along which the cenotes are forming.
After the initial collapse of a sinkhole, when the remaining hole exposes groundwater, it's known as a cenote in the Yucatan.
The word comes from cenote, which in Mayan means place where you can get access to water.
At least 900 sinkholes make up the Ring of Cenotes, yet these are only a fraction of the staggering 6,000 sinkholes estimated in the Yucatan. Together, they make up part of the largest underwater cave system in the world.
Most of the time, you will have several cenotes that are very close one to each other, and they are connected by underwater passages. So there's like a long, big cave in which you can enter in several points through these cenotes. And as a matter of fact, in the Yucatan is the largest cave in the world, which is now over 370 kilometers.
The cenotes are unique because they have unbelievable formations, stalactites, stalagmites, columns, endless tunnels. They have beautiful, crystal clear water. It's just beautiful.
But with dead ends, narrow passageways, no light, and no obvious way to the surface, their beauty can be deceptive and deadly.
The cenotes or cave diving is dangerous is because people don't have emergency access to the surface. When you travel in a cave, you use the cenote as an entrance and then you travel inside. So if you have any problems, you can't just go up. You need to come back all the way to the entrance and surface.
Explorations of these unique ecosystems reveal species found nowhere else on Earth.
Endemic species are there, blind fishes, and there is a blind swamp eel.
The cenote is a capsule of time. You can find fossil of shells, corals, animal bones. They also found prehistoric fishes.
They also offer a glimpse into the mysterious world of the Mayans, who believed these sinkholes were passageways to the underworld.
If you dive, you will find artifacts, ceramics, tools, and of course skeletons from the Mayan times. They will go and pray to have more wet and rains. Would do sacrifices and throw animals to the gods of rain and stuff like that, and humans.
The Mayans' sacrificial reverence for cenotes came from their ability to produce fresh water.
In the Yucatan Peninsula is the only source of water, of fresh water, so it's vital for the human life.
Having access to cenotes, to the water in the cenotes, it was crucial from early times. And so both Maya and present-day people in Yucatan are using this.
Today, conservation of the cenotes is critical to life in the Yucatan.
It is important to preserve and protect cenotes because they are both a cultural and an environmental heritage for the people of the world.
So it's very important for the ecosystem. The cenotes help to filter all the rainwater before it arrives to the ocean, to the coral reef. So it's a process that they need to go from the cenote through the mangrove and then to the coral reef.
The balance is very, very delicate.
Those sinkholes have made the Yucatan livable for thousands of years. Over 12,000 kilometers away, the fastest growing rate of sinkholes in the world threatens the Dead Sea in Israel.
The rate of recession, we should all be worried about it.
Sinkholes can appear anywhere, a deadly consequence of the geological imperative of the Earth. Around the Dead Sea in Israel, they become a minefield of destruction.
The first sinkhole in the Dead Sea area was reported in the late 1980s. So if you look at aerial footage before 1980, there were no sinkholes in that area. Now, we have almost 6,000 sinkholes, and they're growing alarmingly. In fact, they're the fastest growing rate of sinkholes in the world.
But why would sinkholes suddenly be appearing after thousands of years of stability? In places like Florida and Mexico, sinkholes occur due to the geological makeup of the landscape. The surrounding limestone is permeable and dissolves relatively easily in water. But this isn't the geological makeup around the Dead Sea. It turns out part of the answer lies in its most abundant resource, salt.
The Dead Sea is 10 times saltier than any other ocean.
Because it's a very, very dry area. It doesn't get much fresh water flowing into it. And it's an old feature, so over time, a lot of water was evaporated from that sea, meaning that it got saltier and saltier and saltier. The sinkholes in the Dead Sea are unique because they're actually forming in a very soluble rock, but it's not limestone, it's actually salt. And as we all know, salt dissolves very, very, very quickly.
But why would the salt be dissolving and creating thousands of sinkholes now? It turns out the Dead Sea is dying. The sea itself has been rapidly shrinking for decades, largely due to the commercial diversion of 95% of the Jordan River's water.
The combined population of that area of the Middle East has quadrupled, which is causing more pressure on the water supply.
In a desert region with little rain, this cuts off the Dead Sea's main source of water.
The water has receded around 1.5 kilometers since the 1960s, and it's only around a third of the size that it used to be.
Like in Florida, where abundant rain can dissolve limestone, creating sinkholes. Around the Dead Sea, rainfall dissolves salt.
The rock there, when the sea was covering it, were full of salt, and when the water receded, these pockets of salt are now encountering fresh water from rain or surface runoff, and that fresh water is dissolving the salt, creating these pockets of openings and areas where sinkholes are forming. There are three primary causes for the formation of sinkholes in the Dead Sea area. The increase in population, there's also a higher demand for water, and there is a reduction in precipitation, about 10% due to climate change.
The growing threat is swallowing roads, destroying buildings, and closing businesses. Entire areas have been closed off due to the threat.
The number of sinkholes is increasing so quickly in this region. Obviously, houses or roads or industry that's built in that area is going to be under threat. Also, with these sinkholes, that may allow pollution from these cities, towns to go down into the water that they use for their drinking water.
The cumulative effect has been a devastating blow to nature in the region.
The lowering of the water in the Dead Sea is causing a lot of damage to the ecosystem there, particularly to the birds. The rate of recession of the Dead Sea is alarmingly high, and we should all be worried about it. As a heritage of the world, we should care about why we are lowering the water levels so much.
If nothing changes, the projections are clear.
The level of the Dead Sea is declining at the rate of 3 feet per year, and by the year 2050, the entire sea will have dried up. It is quite alarming that we will completely have lost the Dead Sea.
As these silent killers continue to appear around the world, both new technologies and ancient techniques are being used to combat the problem.
All the good ground in Florida has already been built upon. So we're left with stuff that is unstable.
Sinkholes, swallowing homes, businesses, and even people. Around the world, these deadly and unpredictable disasters are on the rise. But in an increasingly populated world, is there anything that can be done? Jay is a geotechnical construction specialist. and has spent almost 20 years working in sinkhole-prone areas in Florida.
What makes sinkholes so dangerous and costly is they're very unpredictable. You have to look at the geology. In simple terms, relate it similar to Swiss cheese. So you have all these different natural holes and depressions, and over time, rain is slightly acidic, and it can slowly erode that limestone layer down at the bottom.
Geologically, these areas are known as karst, regions around the world that are underlain with soluble rocks like limestone. Like Florida and the Yucatan, they're often characterized by underground drainage systems, and when it rains, can become riddled with sinkholes. When sinkholes appear in heavily populated areas, the results can be costly and catastrophic. In 2014, a sinkhole collapsed the showroom floor of the National Corvette Museum in Kentucky, plunging 8 classic cars into a 9-meter deep pit. After extracting the cars, it took a year and a half, $3.2 million US, and almost 4,000 tons of rock to fill and repair the hole. The safe restoration of the site also included the use of piles, an ancient technique used in areas with unstable ground around the world.
Micropiles, underpinning, push piers. In essence, they're inserted in the ground to support the foundation. Similar to putting the helm on underground stilts. You're going all the way around the perimeter, and the home is held up by those underpiles.
But can anything be done to prevent sinkholes and protect structures before they appear?
We lowered down cameras.
Modern technology may hold the key.
The only way to truly know what's going on is to use testing methods and do ground penetrating radar to look for anomalies or voids in the soil.
The radar detects any voids, cracks, and other conditions that could lead to sinkholes. If the ground appears weak, engineers can create reinforcements.
A big part of our business is actually pre-treating the ground prior to the foundation being laid. We will do a ground improvement technique called vibro stone columns, where we're inserting a large vibro float down about 20, 25 feet into the ground, and there's a stone tube where that stone falls down into the bottom, and the tool is worked up and down, basically building a stone column that takes a very loose soil site and increases the load-bearing strength up to an acceptable building strength where the building is not going to settle down under its own weight. Vibro in itself will trigger any problem sinkholes that are on the site, and then we can just fill them with stone and address them at that time before building. So the most common methods that engineers do recommend is, number 1 is compaction grouting. Number 2 would be underpinning, and number 3 would be chemical grout. Compaction grouting is pumping concrete under high pressure into the ground to fill voids and densify soil. That's going to seal the limestone layer, that's like Swiss cheese, protect it. The chemical grout is done under a low pressure, and we can safely do that all the way up to the surface, and it's designed to densify all the upper soils. So you're basically sealing that, protecting it.
Jay has found the best protection is early detection.
The faster you can identify a problem in the beginning, the less money it is to address it and fix it before it becomes a major issue. The future of sinkholes in Florida, they're going to continue to be prevalent. The big positive is we've figured out how to address these and fix them. It's just one of those prices to pay, I would say, to live in this beautiful tourist destination.
As the world's population grows and development strains the landscape, the threat of sinkholes continues to rise.
You have to be very careful in how you plan urban development. Population growth, more demand for water, and construction due to urbanization can result in the increase of sinkholes occurring.
Without changes, the future seems inevitable.
Obviously, there's going to be some impact when it comes to how much the Earth can support before something like this happens again.
Sinkholes, terrifying acts of nature that can swallow the world in the blink of an eye. Science shows that human development has been creating them at alarming rates. Yet their total impact reveals both life-giving water and an extraordinary glimpse into ancient worlds. And while building techniques can help slow their deadly march, we might take a nod from the Mayans' reverence and look toward protecting the lands from which these deadly acts of nature spring.